The Pawnee are a Central Plains Indian tribe that historically lived in Nebraska and northern Kansas, but today are based in Oklahoma. They are the federally recognized Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, who are headquartered in Pawnee, Oklahoma. Their Pawnee language belongs to the Catawban language family, and their name for themselves is Chattix, or men of men. Historically, the Pawnee lived in villages of earth lodges near the Loup, Republican, and South Platte rivers. The Pawnee tribal economic activities throughout the year alternated between farming crops and hunting buffalo. In the early 18th century, the Pawnee numbered more than 60,000 people. They lived along the Loup and Platte River areas for centuries. However, several tribes from the Great Lakes began moving onto the Great Plains and encroaching on Pawnee territory, including the Dakota, Lakota, and Cheyenne. The Arapaho dog-eater also moved into Pawnee territory. Collectively, the Pawnee refer to these tribes as Kararat, enemy tribe, or Kariksuperu, enemy. The Pawnee were occasionally at war with the Comanche in Kiowa, further south. They had suffered many losses due to Eurasian infectious diseases brought by the expanding Europeans and European Americans. By 1860, the Pawnee population was reduced to just 4,000. It further decreased because of disease, crop failure, warfare, and government rations policy to approximately 2,400 by 1873, after which time the Pawnee were forced to move to Indian Territory, which later became Oklahoma. Many Pawnee warriors enlisted to serve as Indian scouts in the U.S. Army to track and fight their old enemies, the Lakota, Dakota, and Cheyenne on the Great Plains. The ancestors of the Pawnees were speakers of Caddoan languages who had developed a semi-sedentary Neolithic lifestyle in valley bottomlands on the Great Plains. Unlike other groups of the Great Plains, they had a stratified society with priests and hereditary chiefs. Their religion included cannibalism and human sacrifice. At first contact, they were distributed widely through modern Oklahoma and Kansas, and they reached modern Nebraska about 1750. Other Caddoan speakers lived to the south in modern Texas, forming a belt of related populations along the eastern edge of the Great Plains. Their unfortified villages of well-scattered grass lodges and earth lodges reflected an assumption that large raiding parties would not arrive without warning. Their inhabitants could not rapidly coordinate defense against a large party of enemies. The Pawnees, with the Wichita and Arikara, were the only Caddoan groups to survive the era of iron firearms and horses, and they all did so by forming compact villages on high ground and surrounding them with ditch and wall defenses. Most of the year was spent in these well-insulated homes, but many would go on communal deer hunts several days' travel from their homes. Some would even hunt buffalo, though without horses this was difficult and dangerous. The first written records of Caddoans comes from Coronado's entrada in 1541. With cavalry steel weapons and guns, he had forced his way through the Apaches, Pueblos, and other nations of the modern southeastern use. But they had no gold. Coronado's interpreter repeated rumors, or confirmed Coronado's fantasies, that gold was to be elsewhere in a location named Quivira. After more than 30 days' journey, Coronado found a river larger than any he had seen before. This was the Arkansas, probably a few miles east of present-day Dodge City, Kansas. The Spaniards and their Indian allies followed the Arkansas in the northeast for 3 days and found Quiverins hunting buffalo. The Indians greeted the Spanish with wonderment and fear, but calmed down when one of Coronado's guides addressed them in their own language. Coronado reached Quivira itself after a few more days of traveling. He found Quivira well settled along good river bottoms, although without much water, and good streams which flow into another. Coronado believed that there were 25 settlements in Quivira. Both men and women Quiverins were nearly naked. Coronado was impressed with the size of the Quiverins and all the other Indians he met. They were large people of very good build. Coronado spent 25 days among the Quiverins trying to learn of richer kingdoms just over the horizon. He found nothing but straw-thatched villages of up to 200 houses and fields containing corn, beans, and squash. A copper pendant was the only evidence of wealth he discovered. The Quiverins were almost certainly Caddoans, and they built grass lodges, as only the Wichita were still doing by 1898. Coronado was escorted to the further edge of Quivira, called Tabas, where the neighboring land of Jaraj began. He summoned the Lord Jaraj, who, with 200 followers, came to meet with the Spanish. He was disappointed in his hopes for riches. The Juraj Indians were all naked, with bows and some sort of things on their heads, and their privy parts slightly covered. Hyde identifies them as Awajis, the old Caddoan name for the Pawnees, possibly including the ancestors of the Skedis and the Arikara. Another group, the Guas, may have been known later as the Panawak. These people put up ferocious resistance when Coronado started to plunder their villages. In 1601, Juan de Oñate led another entrada in search of the wealth of Quivira. He met Esquenzakes, probably Apaches, who tried to persuade him to plunder and destroy Quiviran villages. About 1670, the Apaches of the southern plains obtained horses and metal weapons in sufficient quantity to make them the dread of all their neighbors. For some decades, the Pawnees were the victims of intensive raiding by large bands of mounted Apaches with iron weapons, and also by war parties of Chickasaws and Choctaws in the east who had firearms as well. The Siouan groups that became Quapaws, Osages, Omahas, Poncas, and Kansas also appear on the plains about this time, driven west by the expansion of the Iroquois, and they too raided the Pawnees. Archaeology indicates that pressure from hostile Apaches may have persuaded the Skedee Pawnees to move from their settlements on the Republican River to the Upper Loop River in the course of the next century or so, 43, 50, 51. Their settlement pattern also changed from little villages of small rectangular earth lodges to more defensible, larger, compact villages of larger circular lodges. The Skedos uniting in this way about 1680. While they're close relations, the Arikaras established a separate identity. In French Canada, Indian slaves were generally called Panis, anglicized the Pawnee, as most during this period had been captured from the Pawnee tribe or their relations. Pawnee became synonymous with Indian slave in general use in Canada, and a slave from any tribe came to be called Panis. As early as 1670, a reference was recorded to a Panis in Montreal. Raiders primarily targeted women and children to be sold as slaves. In 1694, Apaches brought a large number of captive children to the trading fair in New Mexico, but for some reason there were not enough buyers. So the Apaches beheaded all their slaves in full view of the Spaniards. By 1757, Louis Antoine de Bougainville considered that the Panis Nation plays the same role in America that the Negroes do in Europe. The historian Marcel Trudel documented that close to 2,000 Panis slaves lived in Canada until the abolition of slavery in the colony in 1833. Indian slaves comprised close to half of the known slaves in French Canada, also called Lower Canada. By 1719, when de La Harpe led an expedition to Catawban lands at the mouth of the Arkansas River, the Pawnees had also acquired horses and metal weapons from French traders, and they were attacking Apaches in turn, destroying their villages and carrying off Apache women and children. In 1720, Boisbriand reported that the Paniasas, or Black Pawnees, had recently captured 100 Apaches, whom they were burning a few each day. De La Harpe planned to establish French trading posts at the mouth of Canadian River and elsewhere in Catawban territory. But this was not done, and the Pawnee remained dependent on infrequent and casual traders, while their enemies, the Osages, benefited from a regular trade. In 1720, Spanish colonists sent a Villazur expedition try to turn the Pawnees away from their French connections, which had been greatly magnified in Spanish imagination. Guided mainly by Apaches and led by an officer lacking experience with Indians, the expedition approached the steep Pawnee villages along the outflow of the Loup River into the Platte River in modern Nebraska. The expedition sent their only Pawnee slave to make contact. He did not obtain any welcome for the Spanish party, and he failed to return to the Spanish camp. The Pawnees attacked at dawn, shooting heavy musketry fire and flights of arrows, then charging into combat clad only in paint, headband, moccasins, and short leggings. Villazur, 45 other Spaniards, and 11 Pueblos were killed, and the survivors fled. In 1721, pressure on the Pawnees was increased by the establishment of a colony in Arkansas by John Law's Mississippi Company. This settlement, too, formed a market for Indian, mostly Catawban slaves, and a convenient source of weapons for the Osages and their relations. A Pawnee tribal delegation visited President Thomas Jefferson. In 1806, Lieutenant Zebulon Pike, Major G.C. Sibley, Major S.H. Long, among others, began visiting the Pawnee villages. Under pressure from Siouan tribes and European American settlers, the Pawnee ceded territory to the United States government in treaties in 1818, 1825, 1833, 1848, 1857, and 1892. In 1857, they settled on the Pawnee Reservation along the Loup River in present-day Nance County, Nebraska, but maintained their traditional way of life. They were subjected to continual raids by Lakota from the north and west. Until the 1830s, the Pawnee in what became United States territory were relatively isolated from interaction with Europeans. As a result, they were not exposed to Eurasian infectious diseases, such as measles, smallpox, and cholera, to which Native Americans had no immunity. In the 19th century, however, they were pressed by Siouan groups encroaching from the east, who also brought diseases. Epidemics of smallpox and cholera and endemic warfare of the Sioux and Cheyenne caused dramatic mortality losses among the Pawnee. From an estimated population of 12,000 in the 1830s, they were reduced to 3,400 by 1859, when they were forcibly constrained to a reservation in modern-day Nance County, Nebraska. The Pawnee won a hard-fought defensive battle around 1830, when they defeated the whole Cheyenne tribe. A Pitaharada Pawnee captured one of the most sacred tribal bundles of the Cheyenne, the sacred arrows, and Skeet Chief Big Eagle secured it quickly. The Cheyenne stopped fighting at once and returned to their own country. The Pawnees in the village of Chief Bluecoat suffered a severe defeat on the 27th of June, 1843. A force of Lakotas attacked the village, killed more than 65 inhabitants, and burned 20 earth lodges. In 1852, a combined Indian force of Cheyennes and invited Kiowa and Kiowa Apaches attacked a Pawnee camp in Kansas during the summer hunt. First, when a Pawnee shot a very reckless Cheyenne with an arrow in the eye, it was discovered he wore a hidden scale mailed armor under his shirt. The killing of this notable Cheyenne affected the Cheyennes to the point that they carried their sacred arrows against the Pawnee the following summer in an all-out war. Warriors enlisted as Pawnee Scouts in the latter half of the 19th century in the United States Army. Like other groups of Native American scouts, Pawnee warriors were recruited in large numbers to fight on the northern and southern plains in various conflicts against hostile Native Americans. Because the Pawnee people were old enemies of the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, and Kiowa tribes, they served with the Army for 14 years between 1864 and 1877, earning a reputation as being a well-trained unit, especially in tracking and reconnaissance. The Pawnee Scouts took part with distinction in the Battle of the Tongue River during the Powder River Expedition, 1865, against Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, and in the Battle of Summit Springs. They also fought with the U.S. in the Great Sioux War of 1876. On the southern plains, they fought against their old enemies, the Comanches and Kiowa, in the Comanche Campaign. As noted above, the Pawnee were subjected to continual raids by Lakota from the north and west. On one such raid, the 5th of August, 1873, a Sioux war party of over 1,000 warriors ambushed a Pawnee hunting party of 350 men, women, and children. The Pawnee had gained permission to leave the reservation and hunt buffalo. About 70 Pawnee were killed in this attack, which occurred in a canyon in present-day Hitchcock County. The site is known as Massacre Canyon because of the ongoing hostilities with the Sioux and encroachment from American settlers to the south and east. The Pawnee decided to leave their Nebraska reservation in the 1870s and settle on a new reservation in Indian Territory, located in what is today Oklahoma. In 1874, the Pawnee requested relocation to Indian Territory, Oklahoma, but the stress of the move, diseases, and poor conditions on their reservation reduced their numbers even more. During this time, outlaws often smuggled whiskey to the Pawnee. The teenage female bandits Little Britches and Catalani were imprisoned for this crime. In 1875, most members of the nation moved to Indian Territory, a large area reserved to receive tribes displaced from east of the Mississippi River and elsewhere. The warriors resisted the loss of their freedom and culture, but gradually adapted to reservations. On the 23rd of November, 1892, the Pawnee in Oklahoma were forced by the U.S. federal government to sign an agreement with the Cherokee Commission to accept individual allotments of land in a breakup of their communal holding.